Okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we introduce ourselves, some housekeeping. One, thanks to CrowdStrike, we do have our third panel member calling in from Zoom. So you'll see Tegan's face floating on the screen in a second, and just request to roll with us and the lovely AV team as we toggle between Tegan and our presentation. The next is that if you do want slides, a printout of our slides are here on the stage, so feel free to come grab and page through them with us. They have been updated slightly since their original printing, but we'll try to call out where things deviate. And then the third is that if you're sitting down, you might have just gotten a handout, and that is something for you to take with you. We are here to talk about moving from pilot to policy, which is a beautiful continuation on the sessions today. And we want you to have something to ground in. We are all here with different contexts from different spaces and places within the movement. And the idea is that everybody should get something that they can take with them today. And if you would like to follow up with either Kathy or Tegan, both of whom will introduce themselves in a second, there is a sign-up sheet back by coffee. We will not spam email, but I will send out like a facilitating email for a follow-up hour session if you have something specific to you or your program or your community that you want to deep dive with them on. Any questions before we jump in? Okay, cool. I'm Julia Ford. I use she, her pronouns. I work for AidKit, which is a technology platform that supports nonprofits and governments in administering direct cash programs at scale. And we have been super fortunate to come from an organic need in Colorado during COVID with something called the Left Behind Workers Fund, which was a pilot, and now, almost 5 years later, this is the first codified unemployment assistance program for people who are undocumented in the US. So pilot to policy. And I am joined by Kathy White and Tegan Lecheler, who maybe we can get up on the screen. Oh, yep. Tegan, do you want to introduce yourself and let's see if this audio works?
Yes, thank you. My face is so big on that screen, which is perfect. My name is Tegan. I'm very excited to be here. My flight was canceled, and so that is why I am in New York City, unfortunately, and can't be in San Francisco with you. But I run program operations and implementation at the Bridge Project, which is a direct cash program for pregnant parenting people. And my background is in community organizing, which is what brings me here to talk to you all today. Bridge has a bill that we just ran for the first time in the last session that would establish a state-run direct cash pilot program for pregnant and parenting people in New York State. The bill was passed in both the House and the Senate, and it made its way into the governor's budget until the very last minute when she axed it. So ultimately it did not pass. Though we will be running it again in the upcoming session, and I will tell you a little more about some things, some pitfalls that we maybe could have avoided to get it through and what we're going to be doing in this next session to get it across the finish line.
Kathy, over to you.
Great. Hi, everybody. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Kathy White, and I'm with the Colorado Fiscal Institute. CFI is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization that uses research and communications, coalition building, and advocacy to advance people-centered, anti-racist tax, budget, and economic policies. We were invited today to talk because we were one of the main groups, along with a lot of community partners who came together during the COVID era to take the Left Behind Worker Fund and turn it into a statewide permanent program. The Left Behind Worker Fund was a $1,000 cash grant to undocumented workers, mostly restaurant workers in the Denver metro area, who lost their jobs when everything shut down, but were ineligible for either unemployment insurance which is our oldest direct cash program, along with Social Security, or any of the stimulus payments that that the federal government were sending to people just right off the bat. So we, along with our partners, created what's now called the Benefit Recovery Fund. It is an unemployment-like program that operates very similar to our regular unemployment insurance program. It sits along our unemployment insurance program and is funded in the same way that unemployment insurance is funded, which is through a premium that employers pay. It is a permanent funding source that is very similar to what UI uses, and that is now a permanent program that was up and running as of March.
Yep. All right, so if you came to talk about building capital and coalition towards positive state legislation for direct cash, you're in the right place. We are certainly not the first people to talk about this over the last 48 hours, but hopeful that we can take this positioning of the session and the nice framework that was laid this morning and coalesce it a bit with some tangible strategies. So our main objective is that everybody walks out of here with something that feels actionable and grounding. We are leveraging a metaphor. I had to check with both Tegan and Kathy this morning to be like, this is a metaphor, right? Yeah, it is. Of a subway map or stops on the subway. So if you think about pilot or program, something that is either new in inception or currently running as the first stop on your subway journey and having a permanent policy be enacted as the last, we are talking about one subway line with some key stops that we think can drive more effective collaborative movement to getting bills passed. This does not mean that there's not transfer stations, there's not alternative routes. This is just one path, but this is what we're grounded in today. Oh, and it is important to note that while you cannot see Tegan's head anymore, she's still here and she can hear us. Okay. So we are kind of anchoring in three main takeaways that we're hoping to touch on today. One is this idea of not shifting your program design, not doing anything different in terms of community-centered design, the way that you collect data, the way that you work in community to best serve the people that you're trying to serve, and to honestly all move towards a world that's better for all of us. But it is about communication strategies, and it's about thinking creatively about how not to change the core ethos of who you are and what you do and why you do it, but think about the people that aren't already with you and how you bring them along. Next up is coalition building, and Tegan will speak to this much more in depth, but we often have this idea of like, we don't want to recreate the wheel, we want to do something new. Well, there's something very powerful when we move from a single pilot to a number of programs, which all have shared aspects that can be consolidated and championed together. So thinking collectively about who can you join with, who's doing similar work, who has similar talking points, and how can you come together, even if you're not in the same city or state. And then last up is, what are ways and strategies for drafting effective bills and actually getting them passed? I keep forgetting that I control these slides. All right, I'm going to pass it up and over to Tegan, who, this is going to be the weird part. You're going to hear her voice, but you're not going to see her face as she guides us through. And Tegan, I'll do my best to move the slides, but please feel free to tell me when to click.
All right, you can hear me, yes?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, amazing. All right, so the first stop in our subway map is designing a pilot, right? Many of you have done this, not all of you have, and are thinking about, how you're going to do this strategically. So when you are designing this pilot, some things you want to think about, first of all, is what is your purpose, or what is the thing that you're trying to prove? Sometimes that's research related, sometimes you have a policy goal, and sometimes you're just trying to get cash to a specific population, right? Which is great. You also want to think about any gaps that might exist in the current landscape that you are able to fill, right? So in the context of Bridge, for example, we knew we cared a lot about early childhood. We knew we cared a lot about families. And at the time, there weren't any programs that were giving cash specifically to pregnant people, so we were able to fill that gap. If your final goal is policy or public adoption, you are also going to want to consider this when you are designing your pilot. So this could be thinking through things like cohort size, or maybe payment amount for that pilot. Ideally, it will act as a proof of concept, and then legislators will see how great, how effective it is, and they will be motivated to scale. I do really, though, want to encourage folks, like Julia said, to not sacrifice impact for ease if your goal is public adoption. I think we talk in the world of policy, we talk a lot about political feasibility, but I think we have to be more creative than our existing institutions if we want to continue moving that needle forward. So if your end goal is legislative, we want to maintain that substance, right? And also, there are certain things you can do in this program design phase to make the fight a little bit easier on yourself without sacrificing the meat of the idea, such as smaller cohort size or payment amount that might translate for public adoption. I also want to talk a little bit about duplicity, like Julia mentioned too. I think we talk a lot about this desire to not be duplicative, right? Which is great, and I definitely understand. I mean, from a funding perspective, it makes a lot of sense, right? Funders are very excited to fund the first of something or to fund this brand new, never before done idea, right? But being the first to do something is great, and being the second, third, and fourth to do something is what takes it from an experiment to a movement. And movement building is how we achieve large-scale institutional change. The third and the fourth and the fifth of something are what actually give it legs. So for that reason, it is not only okay to be duplicative, it is necessary to be duplicative. And we shouldn't let our desire to be the first to do something stop us from engaging in exciting and important work. Duplication is also what brings us to the next stop on our subway map, which is coalition building. So now we've clarified our goal, right? We've designed a program that speaks to that end stop that we're trying to achieve. Now we have to figure out how we're going to get there. Next slide, please. So we can use this power building checklist to figure out what our next stops look like. And after we have identified our goal, the next thing we're going to want to do is take inventory. And one way that you can do this is by conducting a SWOT analysis. A SWOT analysis is an exercise that you may be familiar with that involves laying out your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, right? So it's going to help you identify what you're already good at and some areas that you need to build on. The opportunities and the weaknesses boxes, in my opinion, are the most crucial because they're going to help you identify the gaps that you need to fill, and these are frankly why we do coalition building, right? We are all good at certain things, and it's impossible to be good at every single thing. So you want to identify where you need to build and then who can potentially help you get there. Your weaknesses might include something like funding, capacity, campaign experience, whatever that ends up looking like. It's going to be really important to identify those things early on. Next slide, please. So to return to our power building checklist, once you know what it is that you have to go out and find, it's time to scan your environment and do some power mapping. Power mapping is going to include putting people on an axis like you see here based on their support for your issue and their influence. So you'll end up with 4 quadrants at the end of this exercise, only 3 of which we actually care about. On the top right is going to be the folks who are, what we call boisterous supporters. They care a lot about your issue and they have the power to do something about it. We want to really strongly engage with them and prioritize their support, which can be like regular communications, meeting with them in person, maybe strategizing with them. These are going to be like politicians, community leaders, subject matter experts, maybe funders, certain voting blocks, anyone who is really with you and really has the power to enact change. The bottom right quadrant, these are the folks who are with you on the issue, but they maybe don't have the power to do as much about it. Despite their lack of influence, though, they're still very crucial, and we do definitely want to maintain communication with them, right? It's maybe folks in this quadrant would be like the general public, certain voting blocks, maybe some subject matter experts. Your grassroots supporters are going to be down in this box. Again, they're very important. We still want to be engaging with them. We still want to be communicating with them. They just maybe don't have the power themselves to actually like pass that policy or be kind of the key that gets you across that finish line. The top left quadrant, now these are the folks who are very powerful and are also very not into your issue. So in the case of guaranteed income, for example, we would place like the Foundation for Government Accountability, the folks who are trying to ban GI, we would place them in this quadrant, okay? Very influential, very not with us. Moving these people in this quadrant is really challenging, and like likely you are not going to move them, right? These people are not going to be door knocking for you. They're not going to be phone banking for you. They aren't writing the op-eds. So really what we're trying to do with this quadrant is just neutralize the threat that they pose, or at least decrease the threat that they pose, depending on how powerful they are. Of these top quadrants, the very influential, either with you or against you, how much time you spend with each of them is going to depend on the political context that you exist within. So if you live in a blue state, for example, with a governor who's pro-cash, you might not need to engage with the upper left-hand quadrant, right? Because you don't need them to win. But if you live in a red state or a state where your governor is anti-cash, you're going to need to spend extra time with the people in this upper left-hand quadrant. Next slide, please. So once you know who's in that upper left-hand quadrant, who's powerful and against you, the strategy to move them really depends on the questions that we see here. So what do they care about, who's their constituency, and who influences them? So for example, if we're talking about a conservative politician, perhaps they care a lot about supporting local business, and they're heavily influenced by the Chamber of Commerce, okay? So then we know, all right, we're going to have a conversation with them, we're gonna wanna dig up some data on the business ramifications of our goal, we're gonna wanna approach the conversation from the angle of business, and we're probably gonna wanna engage with the local Chamber of Commerce. And that's a really important piece of power mapping, right? So power mapping has to include the people who are directly related to your work, but also the people who are indirectly related, which can be a little bit more complicated, right? But if you're gonna do it and you're gonna do it well, you want to include your influences, but also your influences' influences, right? Because that's how you move people. That's how you get them to be on your side. Next slide, thank you. So the next step, after we've done our power mapping, is gonna be to find a local sponsor. Now, this may seem a little bit out of order to have done all this power mapping and thinking who's with you and against you and how you're gonna approach them before you even have a bill. But the reason that you have to do it after is because of those top quadrants that we identified in the power map. They are gonna influence who you want as your sponsor. So if you know that there is someone who is very influential, very against you, that you're gonna need on your side, or at least not super against you, and you're in a political context where you have to care about them and their take on your issue, you want to approach a person as your sponsor who isn't someone that politician has a contentious relationship with, right? Someone who isn't gonna turn them off before they even hear the bill. Now, I'm not saying we want to pander to the people that are against you. We don't ever want to completely water down your bill, right? Just so the people in that upper left-hand quadrant are happy. But there are some small things that you can do to make the fight a little bit easier without sacrificing your impact, like choosing a sponsor who is maybe a little bit more palatable to folks in that quadrant. The next step is to create the actual bill. And so for that, we're going to hear from Kathy.
Thanks, Tegan. How many of you have done power mapping before? Or do you make it a part of the work that you do when you even get started working on a pilot project or any kind of policy that you're moving? So you're pretty familiar with it. How many of you take a lot of your coalition members or community members into that process of mapping power? Yeah. Well, I think this is really, when we talk about policy, this is one of the things that I think is the most important thing that we should be doing. So I'm going to talk about moving something from a pilot to a statewide permanent policy. And just like we heard yesterday, every pilot is different, every state context is different, every group of participants and communities that you're serving are different. Every participatory action research program is different and runs by different operations. So as I was thinking about talking about this, I wanted to just highlight some of the things that I thought could be common amongst all of those different policies, like what to do, what would you really need to do to move a policy despite all of those variabilities. And I think this thing that Tegan brought up is one of the most important, and then that is assessing power. Moving policy is all about power relationships, understanding when the current is with you, understanding when it is not, when you're not going to win unless you shift your perspective or you shift your messengers. And that is the policy process. You can have great data, you can have compelling stories, you can have a moment, but if you don't recognize the power context that you're operating within, it'll be really, really hard, and you're likely to fail. So I think that the power mapping is a really important part, and these are some of the other things that I think could be really key to moving a pilot program to a permanent statewide policy. The first thing, these tips and strategies, build your case. You're running your pilot program because you have a group of people, you had an immediate need, and you had a problem in front of you that you wanted to solve. When you're doing that, though, think about what can you gather from the pilot? What can you learn from the pilot that you can leverage to move a statewide policy? How is it applicable to a broader group of people? As the speaker before us talked about a universal program, like when could your program be taken universal? Would you want to do it as a universal program? For us in Colorado, we didn't want to. When do you want to think big? Like, when do you want to be a visionary and strive for that utopia? And when is that utopian vision the enemy of your protopia, right? So you have to think about those kinds of things, and your pilot gives you such rich data that can be used to leverage into your statewide policy. I think crafting a bill is taking into account all of these things. Understanding your opposition. Who is your greatest opposition going to be? When you're crafting a bill, one of the things that you want to do is you want to inoculate against your strongest opposition. So that could be by bringing them into the fold. What are the things that they're most concerned about? In Colorado, that was our business lobby. Our number one opponent was the governor, and the person that he listened to was the business lobby. So what did we need to do to move them to our side? We needed to create a revenue-neutral program for them. We needed to do a lot of things that would satisfy their concerns so that they were either, and in our case, they lobbied this bill with us side by side, the Chamber of Commerce and Colorado Ski Country with a Republican bill sponsor. Lobbied our bill side by side with our progressive community and our immigrant communities. So I think that's really important to think about. Can you inoculate against their greatest concerns? Can you put that concern into the bill? It might look like something like having evaluation, right? Having a report back to legislators so that they can say, we're not going to just give money away to people if we know it's not going to work. Like, build that into your bill because you take their strongest arguments away from them. It might be something like privacy data. For our bill, one of the number one concerns from both participants and administrators and the state and businesses was privacy. They wanted a firewall between each of those participants so that everybody had, like, plausible deniability. Employers could say, oh, we don't know that we're hiring people without work authorization. Immigrant workers were not afraid to give over their information to a third-party administrator, and a third-party administrator could work with the state in a way that that gave the state also that firewall that they needed to be in compliance with federal law. So there's all of those things. What is your opposition's greatest arguments? Build that into your bill, because it just creates a smoother glide path for you going forward. And then finally, stories. I think stories are really, really important, and this is something that you get such great stories from the pilots that you're running. That is the root of what you're really trying to do. That is the radical that you're trying to take and grow into a statewide policy, is the problem that you're solving through your programs, your pilots, and the people who are asking you to solve those problems, those communities. That is the root that you want to grow into a statewide policy. And I think that one of the things about stories that you're collecting is use those stories to amplify the data that you're collecting. Because some people are moved by stories and some people are moved by data. And so you really need both, and you need them working together. And the same with data. There's lots of researchers here. I come from a research-based organization, but the research that we do always has to amplify a story, a personal story. If it doesn't amplify that voice, we don't use it. We don't ask those questions because they're not relevant to the experts who have the lived experience. So I think that, again, is a really important thing. Don't just story collect for a purpose, right? So that the stories that you're collecting and putting in front of lawmakers amplifies the data, it validates the data that you're having, because you may not have perfect data. And so to inoculate against imperfect data, you have personal stories, and vice versa. Data can show that a personal story has statewide concern, and that's what you really want. You don't want people to say, well, your pilot is working just fine. It solved the problem for these individuals, and nobody else has this problem. So problem solved, we can all go home. That's not what you want. You want to have your data amplify the problem so that it is something of statewide concern, that lawmakers and neighbors and people who aren't experiencing that problem themselves can see themselves in, and they can say, oh, this is something that we should do, and it should be a statewide policy that affects everybody, and we should put resources toward it. So story banking is very important. I think prepare to fail. I think the person at the last session just said, you're going to fail. And I think preparing to fail is a really important piece of running public policy. You're not going to get something through the first time. We didn't. It took a couple of times. And every time is a learning lesson. So take what you learn from those failures and move them forward. Can you have planned failure? Like, if you know you're not going to get your policy through, does it help you build momentum to take it to the legislature anyway? That's a part of navigating those power relationships, those power dynamics. You may have to fail, and that could be planned failure. So how big do you go in a bill that you know isn't going to make it through? Or how small do you go because you want to build your argument that this is just a matter of fairness, this is just a technical fix. Like, when you have done a solid power analysis and you can understand where you want to go, what's your end of the subway stop, then you can start building toward failure. You build failure into your program, and good policy will come out of it because you build momentum. So.
Love it.
Yes, don't be discouraged.
I think we can stop sharing now, so Tegan's back live. There she is. We definitely want to pass this back to the room, and I'm going to hop around with a microphone, because AV folks, is Tegan able to hear if it's not in the microphone, though? No. Okay, great. So I'll bop around. Does anybody have any questions? I was going to wear better shoes. I failed.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Cindy. I'm here from San Jose, an hour away from here, and I am the community organizer for a local agency that we have a Pasos committee of 30 members. So right now, they're actually working on their own pilot. So we were trying to change CAPI as a retirement for non-immigrants, so those who don't qualify for SSI. Unfortunately, this is the third year the governor has vetoed against it, so we shift to guarantee income for seniors. And right now we see our county having another 5 pilots. So we were trying to just add the evaluation part, right? Because Pasos was able, and this is community leaders, immigrants and documented leaders in the community were able to secure $1.5 million with another foundation just to start their own pilot. But we want the county to pay the evaluation. And that's the pushback we're receiving right now, right? We have failed. We did our power mapping. We saw we only have 1 vote out of 5. So we decided to retract and evaluate ourselves. Was another push we have to do, right? So we use our network, how we can navigate through the loopholes to go through there. So they say yes to the evaluation, but now they wanted us to have a control group, but we don't have the money to pay for it. So do you guys have any suggestions how to keep pushing? It seems like every time we fail, it's heavier and heavier and heavier. And with the community that we're working, right, like the more I encourage them, explain them, like we have to fail 10 times to win 1, right? But they don't want to because it seems all their life they've been failing. And also with their own pilot, right, they set up their own requirements, right? So nobody comes and says, this is the requirement. But at the moment to be part of the evaluation, we had to add more requirements. So they already have that pressure. It's like we already changed, we already shift, we're already going with that program, right? But what it means to just keep pushing and to create just a local policy, not even state policy, that's my question, is like how you move on, but like why we still need a control group if we've seen over the years that GBI works. And seniors don't, unfortunately, can wait, right? We have a lot of undocumented seniors that got laid off during COVID. They used all their savings, and a lot of them didn't get the jobs back because of the age, the discrimination of age. But that's my question, is like how you continue to move forward with this type of policies or pilot to policies with even local level. Thank you.
That's a great question. And that sounds like you're in a place where with your council members, you have 1 vote of 5. So you need 3 on the council, so you need 2 more. I think I would be digging into who are those people? Are they gettable? Are they all in that quadrant that's like influential and just totally against you? You may not want to waste your time with them, but is there somebody who's maybe not influential, right, on the council, but totally with you? Could you help boost their influence? Do they talk to somebody, could you go over those 2 votes? Like, could you go and run a statewide program that would basically get you what you needed and circumvent the county level? Because it is hard. That's what I was talking about with the power, recognizing when the power is with you and when it is against you. Like, if you're just running your head up against the wall, it is demoralizing, and people they get tired. They just think, there's no point in fighting anymore. And so how can you look at where the power currents, where are you in that current, and can you ride with it somehow? Is there somebody above them? Could you go, I'm not sure why the governor vetoed your bills twice, but do you have anybody in his office that you could just have a frank conversation about what is the problem? How can we overcome this problem? Because that might help you just to shift your tactic a little bit, or to get a different messenger, or maybe add somebody to your population. If it's not just seniors or undocumented seniors, can you add somebody to your pilot that would then help them see a way forward? I feel like there's lots of things that you could do, and it all comes back to like, where's the real sticking point? What is their real objective? Is it because they don't, is it a messaging objective? Is it a population? What is it? Because it doesn't seem like a ton of money either in this state anyway. Like $1.5 million just doesn't seem like a lot of money to find. So I would love to talk with you just about that. I'm sure, or...
I was just going to say, subtle plug.
Yeah.
There is a sign-up sheet, and everybody should use it because Tegan and Kathy are very generous with their time.
Yeah, and maybe some of our partners that we worked with in Colorado, or Tegan's group in New York, again, could maybe just help do a more sophisticated analysis of like what are the things that we could try, recognizing that it is kind of hard to shift, especially if all of your resources are going in one direction. It's kind of hard to pivot and go in another direction, but that might be what has to happen in order for you to get over this wall that you keep hitting. So,
thanks, Kathy.
Tegan?
Tegan, anything to add before we go to the next question?
I would echo, everything that Kathy said. I think sometimes a fresh set of eyes can be super helpful when looking at the strategies that you've been employing and the angles that you're using. And so, definitely like Kathy and Julia said, I think we would be happy to provide that fresh set of eyes if that's helpful to you, or if there are other people who can, maybe see something that, when you're really in the weeds, it's so easy to miss, and I do that all the time, and then you get someone else to look at it, and they're like, oh, try this thing, and it's so obvious, but you just need someone who isn't as deep in it, So I would encourage you to reach out to your network and your community for support, and I think all three of us would be happy to provide that support.
That's a key point about when you're doing your power mapping initially. The more voices that you have at the table, you just have better ideas of spheres of influence. Because it's a weird kind of thing of like, who knows who, and who do they know, and who do they know moves somebody else, right? It's those really weird questions of relationships. And so the bigger the group that you have, the more diverse a group that you have to do that initial power mapping, the better your map is going to be. It just opens more doors. It unlocks more opportunities. Because you can say, oh, well, I don't know this person, but so-and-so knows this person, and they know somebody. And so that's why it's really helpful to be as inclusive and as broad and as diverse as you can be within that circle of concern, like, with trusted people at that beginning when you're laying out that power map.
All right. Hi. My name is Cami Goldhammer with Hummingbird Indigenous Family Services, and run a GBI that serves Native moms in the Seattle area. I have a question. It might end up being more of a statement because I have a feeling I know what the answer to the question is, so then there'll be a statement afterward. My question is, where do tribes fit in this, and have you intersected with any tribal governments when it comes to, when it just comes to passing legislation? And if so, what's that experience been? And if not, I would love to share a little bit there too.
I would love that, and this is a thing that I would really appreciate that. We do work with a couple of organizing groups who are organizing mostly urban Indians, because in Colorado we do have one, the entire state of Colorado used to be basically indigenous land, 40, 50 different tribes called Colorado home all over the state, and it has become now where we just have a small corner of our state that has sovereign land on it. And so it's hard to work through, even though we do have a higher indigenous population. It's very diverse, and it's mostly urbanized. And so it's hard to find organizations like a tribal government that would work with specific organizations or come to the Capitol, but we do have groups that do that, and we have and so the working relationship is a little, it just feels a little harder as we're learning, right? How to, like, how does the federal government get involved, and how does the state government get involved, and what does the tribe have authority to do? But we do. So I would love to talk to you more about that.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I bring it up is, one, I'm Indian, so there's that part. Native, we call ourselves that. Anyway, so Native. So there's that's part of it, and that's who I serve as Native community. Also an urban community, though, but we have a couple of tribes that have that are considered urban in the Seattle area. But just for like a little context, because most folks aren't aware of kind of tribal law and how this works, is we're sovereign nations. So within the United States, you have essentially 600 countries, right? Like 600 countries that state law doesn't apply to. And this is where the importance of a federal law is there, really, really matters with impacting Native people, because what happens at the state level doesn't matter when we're on the res. Okay? And so we saw this happen. I was the campaign manager to pass paid leave in Washington State a couple years ago, and we saw that where all 29 federally recognized tribes in the state opted out of paid leave. So not a single Native parent or caregiver in Washington State that works for their tribe or a tribe gets access to paid leave, although every Washington resident gets access to that, right? So it was a really, it's definitely an important thing to think about. So when thinking about guaranteed income or any state legislation, because I'm sure we all intersect and have a lot of different things that we care about and might be involved in, being able to do kind of the same type, all that you're talking about with like connecting to legislators, like we cannot forget Native families in these conversations as some of the most disenfranchised people in this country, and then jurisdiction. And we are, because the thing is, as Native people, we are a political class. We're, yes, it's a race or ethnicity, but we are sovereign people and we're a political class. So it is quite different from the average American citizen, if that makes sense. So just wanted to put it out there, and definitely happy to be involved. And as we're looking at this in Washington State, running like the only GBI that serves Native families in this country, thinking about, how we're going to do that in Washington State, because we have tried multiple times in Washington State to also pass legislation for GBI that has failed, and thinking about how do we make sure our Native families are covered under that and included in it, because we are almost always left out of it. So, thank you.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cami. I have no sense of time in terms of how we're doing. Is there somebody from the organizing body that can? So what does that mean? Are we done?
Till 12.
Oh, okay. Maybe one final question, if there is one final question, and if not, everybody can take a bathroom break. Anybody else?
Hi, Larry Cohen. Good to see you, Tegan. I was curious, you had mentioned at the beginning to talk about some of the things you may have done differently for the Bridge Project to potentially pass the legislation, if there are any lessons. If you could briefly, just if you have a chance to flesh that out as to what might have been done differently or what you'll do in the next session to push it across the finish line.
Yeah, good question. So what ended up happening in New York is ultimately we have a governor who is anti-cash, which is tough, right? Because within that power map, she's very influential and she's not with us. And it really matters that she's with us because, like I mentioned, it passed in both the House or the Assembly and the Senate, and then she removed it at the last minute. I think what's tough about that and what can be tough about power mapping is that it was included in her budget, and ultimately what it came down to is that she was afraid that a hit piece would be written in the New York Post and she wouldn't be able to defend the decision to have a state pilot, right? I have a lot of feelings about that. And what that tells me in terms of like actionable items is that we needed to do more education with the executive around the program, the value of the program, the data we're seeing, how it affects maternal and infant health, so that if and when a piece came out slamming her for doing a policy of this type, she would be able to defend it, or at least feel more confident defending that. And I think we had spent so much time organizing assembly members and senators and different unions and whatever else, some of these groups, and that went really well because they all passed it, right? But we did not, or we underestimated the extent to which she didn't feel confident talking about cash. And so I think in this next session, we know a little better now actually where she falls on that axis is a little more on the against us than we had previously thought, and we can use that to spend more time with her, spend more time with her office, provide them with more materials, more research, more data, and hopefully that will allow her to feel more confident if she gets criticism for passing a bill like that. But it's tough, right? Because it was truly the 11th hour that she took it out, and I mean, it was very annoying, but I think, like Kathy and others have mentioned, failure is an inherent part of it, and we're just gonna get back up and do it again next session, and hope that if we can do a little bit more around the education piece with her, that we'll be able to get it across the finish line this time.
Thanks, Tegan, and thank you, Kathy, and thanks all of you.